Hello, my name is Dave Emmi, and that song that you just heard was called Philadelphia Execution. And that's on the CD titled Philadelphia Execution, which is a companion to the book that has just been published, also titled Philadelphia Execution. And what the story of the book is about is my experience as a jury foreman on a first-degree murder trial here in the Delaware Valley. And there were a lot of compelling things about the incident. If you're looking at the papers here, the rising handgun violence in Philadelphia is a significant thing that's occurring in the region. And this kind of put me right at the heart of it. After the event happened, I was very disturbed by a lot of things. The youth that was involved. The defendant was 17 years old, and the victim was 19 years old. And seeing lives ended that early, before they even started, was just something that affected me after I served. The other thing that bothered me a lot was once you heard the testimony about what was going on in these regions of the city, you knew it was going to occur again. There was just a feeling of disillusionment culturally, because you knew the next weekend it was going to happen again. So there was a sadness that inflicted me. And then certain things happened in the trial that I'll expound upon in a little while that made me question our justice system and how we're coming to conclusions about guilt and innocence in these kinds of trials. So what I'd like to talk about is I want to talk about the past, because the history of the region has an impact on what is occurring today. So I want to talk a little bit about the history here, how our jurisprudence system was started, and how it's occurring today, how kind of a then and now type of perspective. The other thing I'd like to do is then talk about exactly what happened at the trial. The deliberations came down to 11 jurors feeling one way and me feeling another way. So there was a 12 angry man aspect to the deliberations that was disconcerting. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the future, what some of this might mean to this region and the country in general. You know, concerning the past, the story that we hear a lot about the formation of America and Philadelphia, and this being the hearth area of America, is that William Penn came over. And he came over on the ship, the Welcome, and with his Quakers, and they started this settlement, this commonwealth. But what really occurred was that before Penn was born, this area had already been colonized. There were colonies of Swedes who had settled here, and they had schools, and they had a criminal justice system. That's why you have Swedesford Road not far from here, and Swedesboro, New Jersey. The governor of New Sweden was a guy by the name of Johann Prins. And you can still go to Prins Park down by the airport. There's John Prins Boulevard in Wilmington. So there is a legacy of these Swedish settlements here. North was this colony called New France, and that's now called Quebec. That's why they speak French there, because the French had settled that colony. Below New France was a colony called New England, and today that's Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, but it was a colony in itself. Below New England was a colony called New Netherlands that the Dutch had settled. And New Netherlands started at about the Connecticut River and went to about Trenton. The most famous city in New Netherlands was called New Amsterdam, which is now New York City. Now below New Netherlands was New Sweden, and this is the area that we live in right here. And New Sweden started at about Trenton, and it went down to the area of around Wilmington, Cape May region. And then south of New Sweden, they had Maryland and Virginia and the other English colonies. You know, why this is important is that Penn knew about New Sweden before he left to have his commonwealth. There was a Quaker here by the name of Robert Wade, and he had sent correspondences to Penn saying, this area of America is pacified. This is a safe place to start your colony. The areas north of here were settled by the Dutch, and years prior there were these Dutch wars between the English. They were called the Anglo-Dutch Wars, and there were 3 of them. And they were mostly trade wars regarding these colonies. And there was also a lot of Indian unrest north of here. There were certain raids where hundreds of people were killed, and Indian raids. So north wasn't very attractive to the idea of a Quaker settlement. South of here, Lord Baltimore had already been granted a charter by the Crown. So this area in between had a marked absence of violence, and it was ripe to be settled for the English settlement. So that's why Penn actually requested this region to become his commonwealth. The other important thing about New Sweden was that there was a marked lack of violence. The Swedes and the Finns were really farmers, where the Dutch were traders and merchants, and the English had wanted to start these tobacco settlements. So this region here, the farmers lived like the Indians. They lived amongst them, and there might have been 3 or 4 deaths in the 20 years that New Sweden existed. So it was a peaceful area. Penn knew it. He came here. He recruited some of the Swedes. One of them, the famous name Rambo, was one of the Swedes that Penn took under his wing to help him translate with the Native Americans. That's how this area got settled. And another important thing about New Sweden was that slavery was outlawed in New Sweden. So the area that America started with was really a free area. It was slavery was forbidden. Where slavery was an institution in Maryland, it was an institution in Virginia. Here, where America would start, slavery was outlawed. And I think that's an important point, because when you're talking about the founding fathers, Washington, Penn, Franklin, you'll hear that, well, they inherited slavery. Slavery was an institution already. You really can't judge them by today's standards. And I think there is some truth to that. You know, for example, women did not get the right to vote in America until 1920. You know, no one would disallow women to vote today. It's hard to judge how people were in 1920. You know, they had different roles women had. You know, they weren't in the workforce like they were today. So I do think there is a truth to the founding fathers inherited slavery. But on the other hand, slavery didn't exist here. And also slavery didn't exist in many civilized parts of Europe at that point in time. It had been outlawed. Slavery was the vehicle to get wealth in the New World. It was an agricultural society. And slavery was, it would almost be like finding an oil field without a drill. You know, if you came over to America without slaves, you couldn't gain riches off of the land. So it was really a vehicle where people got enormously wealthy off of the slave trade and the products that were produced by the slave trade. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. But people like George Washington in Mount Vernon, he had over 307 slaves. I mean, he was into the slave trade big. So was Jefferson. So was Penn. You don't hear these things, or they're given a pass, like, oh, it was something that they adopted. Well, there were also abolitionists at that point in time. So I think it's time for a wider historical view. The other thing about New Netherlands that was north of here is that they freed slaves. You could purchase your freedom. They had indentured servants also. All the slaves weren't black. There was Indians were slaves, some Germans were slaves. You could purchase your freedom. You know, that ended when the English came. As I said here, the Quakers and Penn, they were slaveholders. The Quakers they had a lot of slaves. There was no question about it. Here, there's the Harriton House. You can still go visit the Harriton House not far from here, which was a plantation that had slaves. Penn had them also. And I guess I'm harping on this slave thing with the past because there is a systemic relationship between slavery, social disenfranchisement, poverty, violence. There is some type of factor that's playing involved here. I don't want to give a pass to say that the murder that I was involved with on the jury was about, it happened because of slavery. You know, I don't believe that. But I do believe that there are systemic relationships that have contributed to this. And to ignore that that is a factor is really just being naive. I mean, it's just how it happened. So let me go a little bit further here on my next slide. Oh, here's a picture of Penn's Landing. Penn, when he came off his ship, the Welcome, he came off in a town which is now called Chester, but it was called Upland because of the Swedes had settled it. And today, you know, Chester is a pretty violent city. There's murders almost every weekend in Chester. But when Penn, the pacifist Quaker, came out, he had a vision of a non-violent pacifist society. So there's a real dichotomy about where he started the country and what's going on there now. This Quaker statue, this is down in Fairmount Park, where they have different statues at the beginning of the country, and the Quakers played a predominant role, no question. And they also have a picture of, you know, slavery, because slavery was a economic vehicle at the time. Also talking about the past, you know, Thomas Jefferson called William Penn the greatest lawmaker the world has ever known. You could argue that Massachusetts and the Pilgrims started America. But really, when you look at the jurisprudence system, that all started here. This is the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation. It was all here in Philadelphia. And it's not a coincidence that Penn's social judicial system was here also. It was in part framed on Penn's vision. You know, Virginia is another settlement where people will talk about the first families of Virginia, Jamestown, etc. But really, Philadelphia was where America started. It was the first capital. It was the first White House. Washington started the country. The Penn baptismal font, I just wanted to talk about that for a second. I was down at Christ Church earlier this summer, and they had a series about slavery in Philadelphia at Christ Church. They had gone through their church records, and they had records about slaves who attended the church and slaveholders who did. And they had a woman who reenacted these roles of the slaves in the area. And the church was packed the 2 times I went, and I would say it was over half black. It was about maybe 60% black, 40% white. And there was just a feeling in the room of frustration that we haven't been told the whole story. We weren't taught all of these things. And what happened with Penn's baptismal font is that England, when the Revolution was beginning, they sent Penn's baptismal font to Christ's Church, the English, to say, look, Penn was always the subject of the English crown. You know, maybe he was a Quaker, but he really was a brother of the King and Queen. So it was kind of a message that England sent to Philadelphia. They didn't send that to Virginia. They didn't send that to Plymouth. You know, this is where America started, is what I'm saying. Here, I think this picture is pretty poignant, because you have the Penn's view in. This is where the settlement started there in Philadelphia. And in front of it was where they traded slaves. I think this picture kind of catches it. It's right there on Front Street. And they would bring slaves in and bid on them there. And really, people like Ben Franklin, he was the editor of the Pennsylvania Gazette. And the Pennsylvania Gazette advertised slaves coming in next week. You know, talk to the editor if you need them. He was involved in it. He knew about it. He profited from it. Anyway. So let me get into the jury, me being on the trial. I don't want to really talk about slavery, make that the whole history lesson. But when I was selected to be on the jury was all white. The defendant was black, the victim was black. And when I was selected, I really didn't think too much in racial terms. I didn't really think that way. But when I was walking to my car, one of the alternate jurors said to me, it's unusual, you know, a black victim, a black defendant, and an all-white jury. And I just didn't think that way, because I was thinking more about the evidence and about the trial and about the murder, not about racial aspects that didn't have anything to do with what we were going to talk about. So I wouldn't think in that mode. But later on, when deliberations came, I could see why there was reason to have a black juror. I think the deliberations might have gone a different way if we did. But we had jury instructions. The judge sat down and he talked to us about presumption of innocence, about when you sit down to deliberate, you're to assume that he didn't do it. He's innocent. Then you talk about what evidence was presented to move you from thinking he was innocent to being guilty. Some of the jurors, they wanted to vote within 10-15 minutes of the end of the trial. It was, all the residue of the emotion of the trial was still in us. They had already made their mind up, and we waited to vote, but I wanted to talk about that it was, I want to say, a rush to judgment. They didn't really need to hear about it. They didn't need to deliberate. It was like, we heard it, he's guilty. I volunteered to be the jury foreman, which kind of put me in a tenuous situation. A foreman really is more of a functional role than a role of authority. You ask for materials from a judge or something like that. You don't really have any authority in it, but I was the foreman, and that kind of put me in a tenuous situation because I was a person who had an opposing view compared to the other jurors. This is the courthouse right here. It's in media, and there's metal detectors when you go in, and there's murder trials happening there today. It's a shot of where it was. When I talk about the evidence in the case really came down to two eyewitnesses. They had no murder weapon. It wasn't found. They couldn't trace the bullets to the defendant. So the vehicle that actually caused the murder couldn't be linked to the defendant. They had two eyewitnesses. One eyewitness had a long criminal record. He said he was drunk that night. He said he was smoking crack. And he originally indicated that someone else had done the murder. So all of us jurors really ignored that one eyewitness. We said he had no credibility. We didn't really give that eyewitness any credibility. The second eyewitness was a mother, and she also had a criminal record. They weren't violent crimes. One was for a petty theft, another was carrying a controlled substance. And she had everything to lose by testifying. She risked her life and her children by testifying, and she was offered no deal by the prosecutors. So there was some credibility about her. But my issue was that it was just someone saying that they saw it. It happened at night. And to really get me, wow, it's beyond a reasonable doubt because one person said it, to me that was an allegation or an accusation. It wasn't a case. I needed something else to corroborate what she said. What came to mind was the Salem witch trials. In Salem, a woman by the name of Ann Putnam went to the authorities and said, hey, this woman's a witch. I saw her elevating some people. And they hung 20 people in Massachusetts over what someone said. Really, an allegation is not a case. I needed something to corroborate it. But the other 11 jurors didn't. They were like, look, if she said it, I believe it, he's guilty. And I said, well, I think he probably did it. I think he's implicated, but for me to get beyond a reasonable doubt because someone said it, that doesn't cut mustard for me. I drew an analogy. I drew a line from 1 to 100 in increments of 10. And I said, for me to be absolutely sure, 100% sure, that's like the sun's going to come up tomorrow. I'm 100% sure the sun's going to come up. Well, is it going to snow tomorrow? I said, well, maybe sometime in the history of Philadelphia it snowed. So maybe I'm 99.9% sure it's going to snow. For me to be certain, beyond a reasonable doubt, I have to be in this 87 to 92% sure that he did it. Beyond that. And this witness and the testimony that's been given to us gets me to maybe 75, 80, but I need something to corroborate her. What if she's mistaken? What if she had an axe to grind with the guy and she's lying? I don't know. I need some type of evidence. But for 11 other jurors, they didn't need that. And I think that's an important point. 11 jurors, it's like 92% of the people didn't need anything else just to say that he did it. That's disconcerting to me. If I have to say that someone here, I'll just use maybe Karen as an example. If I say, hey, Karen stole my car, for them to go arrest her just because I said it, you need to find my stolen car in her driveway. You need someone else to say that they saw the car stolen. But for 11 people, for 92% of that jury, The fact that someone said it, that was enough to find the guy guilty. And it was a kid, he was 17 years old. It was disturbing. If it had to do with money or something like that, I think I just would have deferred to everyone. I would have said, fine, okay, that's enough, and I would have got out of there, really. But it was a murder trial, and it was a young kid, and I had to hold out. I mean, there just wasn't enough evidence to convict him of that. I want to talk about the future a little bit too here. After the experience, it was very emotional. The guy was shot twice in the head at point blank range. That's why it's called Philadelphia execution. The first gunshot entered his head right about here in his skull, and it bounced off, and the shell fragments disintegrated against a row house. But when you see a 19-year-old kid, a close-up of this picture, an autopsy photo, with his head, a portion of it taken off, it's very disturbing. You saw his youth. There's no gray hairs, there are no wrinkles in his skin. He's a boisterous young person. And with his head blown off, it's just a disturbing thing. You see it on TV, but it's a different thing. It was a stainless steel table and a white bed sheet, and you saw blood stains on it. And he had a younger brother who went up and testified. And you just felt, when you heard about what was going on in these areas of the town, like there was no way his younger brother is not going to fall into this same kind of cycle. There was no father in the house. You just knew that there was going to be more of this violence, and it was just saddening. And escalating senseless gun violence. I guess that's... Last week, 6 kids were shot on a playground in Mantua. One guy was killed after a basketball game. It's just disturbing. And also the criminal justice system. We've all seen these cases. Maybe a celebrity being charged. We know that he's beaten his wife, or there's some type of thing with this celebrity. Well, there's fans around the steps cheering him. It's disconcerting. The criminal justice system is, my view of it, I was disillusioned, and I felt that there needed to be some kind of reform. This picture here, this is a shot of a row house in Chester, and it's obviously condemned. Between Chester, where this murder took place, and Media, I think that's, well, I don't have it. Later on I'll show you a shot of the row houses in Media. There's only 2 miles of Providence Road. Providence Road's the oldest inland road in America, and there's just 2 miles that separate them. And the row houses in Media are going for something like $750,000. They were built at the same time the row houses in Chester were. There's a whole different world in this 2-mile stretch of road that's the oldest road in America. And it's just not here in Philadelphia. I mean, even Lancaster Avenue, you cross City Avenue, it's a different story, and we know it. So, anyway, I can't tell you how the case turned out because you won't buy the book. But I'm holding out. There's 11 people who feel that evidence is enough. And what happened was we got additional evidence from means that didn't happen at the trial. And that additional evidence got us into a more cooperative mode. So that's really what happened presently. But to go back to the past a little bit, I don't want to deflect the personal responsibility. This person who shot somebody was 17 years old. He knew right from wrong at that point in time. It was nighttime. He had a gun in his hand. There was drug dealing going on. He was in a bad space at a bad time. And I don't want to deflect personal responsibility talking about the past. But there is a relationship between slavery, poverty, social disenfranchisement, not getting ahead, and violence. There is some type of link there. And, I talked a little bit about our founding fathers being slaveholders. You don't hear about it, but this summer, a lot happened downtown. They excavated the White House there in Independence Mall, and they found that Washington had slaves in the White House. But he hid them. They were hidden in secret passageways. He didn't want to show that he was a slaveholder. He had over 300 of them in Mount Vernon, and gained a lot of money from it. I mean, he was into the slave trade bit. Penn had slaves. maybe it's time that we start to have a wider accountability, that we grow up a little bit about our founding fathers. They did great things. Washington was a great military strategist. He really was. He was also cruel. There was no question. He was a cruel guy, inhumane. Franklin's another guy, and I want to talk about this runaway situation. The linchpin to slavery was what would happen to runaways. If someone ran away, they could do anything to you. And some of the tortures that they do, they cut your foot off, they cut your ear off, they brand you. The one that I think was really cruel is they'd sell your kids off. Once you ran off, you had kids, that your kids would be sold to another plantation. It was everything, you were open game if you ran away. That's what made slavery work. It's almost, the analogy I can draw is, in Philadelphia, there's a lot of people driving with uninsured vehicles. If there was a law that had everybody who drives uninsured has their hands cut off, well, everyone would be insured at that point in time. It was the brutality of running away was what kept slavery working. And as I said, Jefferson had 300 slaves, fathered children with Sally Hemings. You don't think any of those slaves tried to run away once or twice? You wouldn't live till you were 40 years old if you were a slave. You would be whipped. The average life was like 37, 38 years old. So I tend to believe some of those guys tried to run away. And what happened? Just what I told you about. You don't see that written in history, but that's why they stayed on the plantation, because they knew what would happen if they ran away. And that's what Jefferson did. That's what Washington did. They supported that institution. And maybe this is some of the answers. I don't talk about answers in the book. I just talk about the experience. But if we talk about our history in a more honest, wider, fuller kind of way, we can understand how the country was built. It was really a lot to do with economics. These words about liberty, freedom, yeah, that was in there, no question about it. But it was really about capitalism, making money, and what I call hyper-greed. Not about having enough to fill your own cabinets, but enough to have 4-story plantations and to have an estate and to have a baronry. And people paid a large price for that, the largest price that individuals can pay, with their lives. I hate to say it, when I thought about Wall Street, what happened this week, I thought about hyper-greed. Isn't that what really drove that? It was charging 37% on credit cards that people couldn't pay, so we could get another yacht. And that's really kind of some of the foundations of the country, sadly. But there were other good things. I don't want to talk about all the bad things, but I'm saying if we talk about it more honestly with ourselves and wider, it might have an impact. Yeah, I think it could. Anyway, this is at the Constitution Center. I think some people have been down there recently. They have the Founding Fathers. There's a room in the Constitution Center with all the Founding Fathers. And so you can walk among them and feel like you're there when they wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation. And it's something about that. The word slavery is not in any of those documents. There's an intentional, duplicitous, deceptive kind of thing going on with it. An analogy I'll draw is, we've lived here in the last couple of years, and all the illegal aliens that came in, all of the people from Mexico that came in and started doing labor. And we saw them, I was at Wawa in the morning, you'd see guys, Juan Gonzalez, they all had the same social security number, right? So they kind of all get paid the same way. When you're not participating in it, you just say, well, it's going on, but it's not my problem. I'm coming to school, I gotta pay tuition, it's not my issue. Well, slavery was like that. Most people didn't hold slaves. Over 90% of the people didn't hold them. It's not my issue. I'm dealing with yellow fever, or I'm dealing with, birth control that wasn't around back then. So you had 10 kids. Women died in childbirth. You had your own issues. But it still has ramifications today. It really does. to get into the present, these are some of the answers. I put in Nils Colleen, and this is a guy that you don't see in your history books. He was part of Ben Franklin and Benjamin Rush and that whole group of people down in Old City. But he was a Swede both times. The rebels arrested him thinking he was a spy. The English arrested him thinking he was a spy. But he was a neutral kind of guy. While the Articles of Confederation were being written, he wrote articles that appeared in the Pennsylvania Gazette promoting independence. And that was kind of the, Fox News or the media of the time. Before they sat down, they opened up the paper, and it was the series of articles that Nils Colleen wrote promoting independence. So he wanted, the Swedes had no love of the English. They had no love of the English crown. They were for independence. They didn't want to pay the taxes. They joined up with Washington. Where a lot of the Quakers made a lot of money off the slave trade, and a lot of the Quakers had empathy towards the British. That's kind of why General Howe took over Philadelphia, because Quakers assisted him. He came here, they had a nice warm meal and beds. The Quakers kind of helped him and pointed out where the rebels were. I mean, some Quakers joined the rebels, I don't want to, but they made a lot of money on the slave trade. Anyway, Nils Colleen, it's in the book, there's a quote, and I had a page, I'm not going to thumb through it now. But Nils Colleen talked about the criminal justice system. He had said, taking people from the general public it could be a bad thing. They're not educated. They're not going to know about rules of law. They can make mistakes. And to have a new group of people at each trial, back then, the majority of people were illiterate. They couldn't write. They just used marks. And to have them judging cases, Nils Colleen had a concern about that. He wrote about it. And it's in the book, his quote. Well, I had a concern about it too. The presumption of innocence. These people, they didn't presume the defendant to be innocent. They wanted to rush and have him guilty just because someone said it. They didn't need a murder weapon. They didn't need the bullets tied to him. It was just a person with a criminal record, at night nonetheless, said they saw it, that's enough, he did it. The whole concept of reasonable doubt, I don't think they really got. I mean, I don't think I was a holdout liberal. I was painted as this bleeding heart liberal, and I was, I think my political leanings might be a little more to the right than the left, to tell you the truth, but I needed evidence to corroborate her testimony. I wanted to believe her, but that wasn't enough to be beyond reasonable doubt for a 17-year-old who's going to face 25 years in prison. I don't know, it was a no-brainer for me, but for 11 other people, they didn't feel that way. There's a woman who wrote a book, her name is Susan Jacoby, and it's called The Age of American Unreason. And I think it is a New York Times bestseller now. It just came out this year. And she works at the New York Library. And she talks about the age that we live in right now, the internet information age. I'm going to use some of her words. She calls it the age of distraction. You get so much information now of really low quality, and you're only awake, whatever it is, 16 hours a day, and you're getting, John McCain grilled chicken with Rachel Ray, and Michelle Obama likes floral tops instead of, you don't really know anything about the candidates, what they're going to do, their voting records. You don't have any of that. It's all this insignificant information. As I said, 6 people were shot about, last week on a playground. That's pretty, 10 miles from here. You don't get that information. You get it one day, but you're going to get Andy Reid's clipboard holder and, what did Donovan McNabb think about on 3rd and 12 in the third quarter. You're going to have hours and hours of that stuff pumped at you, but you don't really get any quality information that you can utilize. And Susan Jacoby, her argument is that years and years of this have dumbed down America into this age of internet distraction. What's more important than 400 cable channels? 500. That's better. You need 800 channels. You need the pay. What's on? What are you watching? You get pieces of information. You don't get the whole story. If you watch Fox News and then you watch MSNBC, you don't even know if they're covering the entire judicial system, the entire political system, that we're having a culture that's just based on distractions. It's based on cell phones and not quality information. And I think she makes a valid point. It's a little scary. Anyway, this is another picture of a row house in Chester. You go up the street 2 miles, the structures were built in the same time. Early 1920s. They're going for $700,000. These ones. These are through media. They were built at the same time, the same brick kind of things. They have Providence Road is the oldest road in America. You're in one world. It's a marked difference 2 miles down the road. Here we go into answers, futures. The first thing I say is there a will to change? Is maybe this amount of murders, there are 400 murders that are happening in Philadelphia a year now. And maybe there isn't a will to have that changed. I moved to Philadelphia in 1993, and there were over 350 murders that year. So it's kind of been on the rise, but in the same 350 to 400 range. Which says to me, that's 15 years, it's still saying that maybe there isn't a will to change it. Maybe it's okay that 400 people get killed a year. And, most of them are children. Most of them are under 20. I'm not sure that there's a will to have it change. When you're on the ground there and you're walking on Providence Road and you see that difference, it tends to embolden the idea that there isn't a will to change. That it's okay to have this amount of violence. We're going to go on. I need to buy an iPod, or it's not my problem. Somebody else's. And so I talk about a stable homicide rate. Those people, illegal cheap labor. Anyway, not to get too cynical, I'll get down to Mayor Nutter, and I've spoken with the Nutter administration about some of this. When Mayor Nutter took office a few months ago, this was the first thing he addressed. He knew that the rising violence was going to have a major impact here. And he tried to pass his own ordinances in the city. And the NRA took action against Nutter, and there was a whole thing. But it was the first thing he did. So, that tends to tell you that there may be will to change this. Also, police are starting to die more frequently now in Philadelphia. It used to be about once every 1 or 2 years a cop was killed in Philadelphia, and people come down from Allentown for the for the funeral and that type of thing. Well, in the last few months, there's been 3 police killings in Philadelphia. And there will be a point in time where the police aren't going to put up with it anymore. They're government officials being killed. Now, whether that will is a little more street justice, whether it's let's have curfews, whether it's, I don't know, but there is a number where there's going to be too many cops killed to accept it anymore. I don't know if that's 500, 600, 800, I don't know where it is, but in the last, I think there's been 3 police killings in the last 3 months. That woman got hit by a car, right? That was a kid, he was 16 years old, stole the Cadillac. Szewski was that officer who was shot in the head with a sawed-off shotgun, another kid at a bar. Anyway, and I talked about the numbers. There is a point in time where you're going to have to do something about it. There's just, conventions aren't going to come here. People aren't going to be, the properties are going to go down. There is a number. What that is, I don't know if we're approaching it or not. And my last bullet point here is about a civilized society. And, I'm not from Philadelphia. I'm from a smaller town. But this amount of murder, I'm from a place, Toronto isn't far from where I grew up. I grew up in upstate New York. And Toronto is about the same size as Philadelphia. Toronto has about 20, 25 murders a year. Philadelphia has over, around 400. I spent a little time in Scandinavia. And the Swedes and Finns would say to me, is it safe in America? I'd like to go visit, but I'm not sure that it's safe. They think of America as like what we might think of Baghdad or something. Like, it's a violent, kind of uncivilized place. And it's, my answer was, you don't go to certain places at certain times. It's okay, but really, to be civilized, to accept 400 or 500 murders within your being kids, and to just go on to buy iPods, and it's just not civilized. I don't know how else to say it. Anyway, but to getting into what I talk about are these 8 to 10 factors, and these problems have been discussed prior. I'm not the first guy who's sat on a murder trial or brought these issues up. But I think we could go from 400 to 200 murders pretty quickly. You're not going to solve it. I mean, there were murders in 1776 with handguns. It's not going to go away permanently. But you could reduce it significantly if you looked at these 8 to 10 factors and took steps on each one. You know, one of them is proliferation of handguns. There's just too many guns out there. There's kids on bicycles with handguns. So they get into some fight at school, they show up with a gun and they shoot people. We got to get some of those guns off the street. Now the NRA is going to go ballistic and they're going to say, you know, the laws are there, guns don't kill people, people kill people. You know, true, but guns, handguns, they grease the skids. You know, they kind of make it a little bit easier to happen. We don't need the same handgun laws in South Philly as they have in Wilkes-Barre hunting deer. You know, it's a different situation. Let's get rational. Let's try to cut that down a bit, handgun sales. There's personal responsibility. What are these kids doing out at 4 in the morning? You know, it's drug trafficking. They know where it is. The police know where it is. Maybe there should be curfews. Maybe take steps. We could cut it down significantly if the will is there. If we look at these 8 to 10 factors without a whole lot of pain, I think. But anyway, let me go further on with this. I've got a couple more slides here. Oh, Birth of a Nation. You know, this is in Fairmount Park too. It talks about the birth of America with Quakers and slavery and they have Penn quotes about peace, etc. And here's Penn pointing at his Charter of Privileges. That's down at the Philadelphia Hospital. That was his charter about freedom and love and tolerance, etc. I think that's it for the slideshow. Okay. Back to day one here. So that's it generally. What I thought I'd kind of end up the discussion with, I thought I'd play a couple of the songs off of the CD, because there's a CD that goes along with this. And what had happened was when I got called out to jury duty, I was recording an album. And I was about 80% of the way done with it, and then this kind of hijacked my thoughts and my life. And the trial lasted over a week, and after it happened, it was just disturbed. I was disturbed by a lot of things. And I had this voice recognition system where I could talk into a microphone and the words would come up on the screen. And I did that in kind of a cathartic way, just to kind of get it out of me, because there was so much angst in me. And I sent it to a lawyer friend of mine. And he sent that back to me and he said, this is good, you should expound upon it and talk about it. And that's how I ended up writing the book. But I was in the middle of a record, and at the same time, I wrote a song about it. So that's the title track of the CD. The rest of the CD doesn't have anything to do with the murder trial, but this is the CD here, and for you guys coming, I've got copies for you. The book is available on Amazon.com, Borders.com. It'll be at the University Bookstore. It's behind us here if you're interested in it. It's $19.95. You get the CD with it. You can also visit my website, www.daveemmi.com. There's links to this. There's videos up on YouTube. Philadelphia Execution, the song that you're going to hear, is up on YouTube. Something else on the CD is on YouTube too. So let me grab my instrument here and I'll play a little music. And then after that, if you have any questions about, you know, the history of the area, about escalating handgun violence here and what's going on, about music recording, about the CD, anything you want to bounce off me, I'm here to answer. And thanks for coming. I really appreciate you guys taking the time out to show up. So let me get my guitar here. And I recently saw Janice Ian, who had a book out also at the Chester bookstore. So musicians putting out books aren't that unusual. You know, Sting has a book out, Madonna has a book out, Arlo Guthrie has one.
it's a natural extension. I'm at the bookstore on Thursday, and I'm not going to have a slideshow there, so I think I'll play a little bit more on Thursday than I will here. Okay, this is the song Philadelphia Execution, and you've heard it when at least some people here started. Here in Southeast PA, on an Indian summer's day, it was 1682 and a new world was born. From a Quaker's secure debt, in his commonwealth all met to build a land where all man would be adored. Well, I'm standing on the ground, and this is what I found, some kind of counter-revolution. There's been another Philadelphia execution. There's been another Philadelphia execution. The city of brotherly love was the place to rise above all the sin that had been committed before. No king would rule the land in this brotherhood of man. Peace, tolerance, and love would unite us all. Well, I'm standing here today, and this is what they say, that killing's in our Constitution. There's been another Philadelphia execution. There's been another Philadelphia execution. From Philly to Hollywood, it's never said, but it's understood. A gun gives you some right to take life away. How did we end up like this, spiraling down in a dark abyss, where killing has become the American way? Well, I'm standing on the ground, I'm looking all around, some kind of counter-revolution. There's been another Philadelphia execution. There's been another Philadelphia execution. There's been another Philadelphia execution. What's happened to the city of brotherly love? Well, I was contemplating playing one other tune. I think I might just do one other one. The rest of the record is love songs, and there's piano songs, and they really don't have a lot to do with Philadelphia execution, because I was working on the record before the trial took place. But a couple of days ago, I was in the Tower Theater. I saw Jackson Browne there, and I have this CD of Villanova, Jackson Browne playing here with Bruce Springsteen opening up. And this is a song here. It's about the Delaware Valley. It's about life and death. It's about the district attorney. About a lot of things that Philadelphia execution is about. But there's hope woven in it. You know, I think I'm afraid that I got a little too cynical, or the book is. It's a disturbing trend. Something has to be done. You know, but this song's about life and death too, in this region. But there's some hope in it too, and I wanted to end on that hope note. So, hope you recognize it. up the chicken man in Philly last night and blew up his house too. Down the boardwalk they're getting ready for one hell of a fight. Gonna see what them racket boys can do. Now there's trouble coming in from out of state and the DA can't get no relief. Gonna be a rumble out on the promenade and the gambling commission's hanging on by the skin of its teeth. Everything dies, baby, that's a fact. Baby, everything that dies one day comes back. Put your makeup on and fix your hair up pretty. Meet me tonight in Atlantic City. Well, I got a job and I put my money away, but I got me some debts that no honest man can pay. So I withdrew what I had from the Central Trust and I bought me and my babe tickets on that Coast City bus. Everything dies, baby, that's a fact. Baby, everything that dies one day comes back. Put your makeup on and fix your hair up pretty. Meet me tonight in Atlantic City. Now I love me dying and I love me be cold, but forever I'll stay. We're going out walking where sands turn into gold. Put on your stockings, babe, the night's getting cold. Yeah. Everything dies, baby, that's a fact. Maybe everything that dies one day comes back. Well, I've been looking for a job, but it's hard to find down here. There's just winners and losers, and don't you get caught on the wrong side of that line. And I'm tired of ending up on the losing end. Last night I met a guy, and I'm gonna do a little favor for him. Everything dies, baby, that's a fact. Maybe everything that dies one day comes back. Put your makeup on and fix your hair up pretty. Meet me tonight in Atlantic City. Meet me tonight in Atlantic City. All right, folks, well, that's the last plug. Philadelphia Execution, book, CD, website, prints were there. Thanks for coming.